Was a time of the preacher when a story begun. The choice of a woman and the love of a man, and how he loved her so dearly. He went out of his mind. Well, she left him for someone that she left behind.
There you go. We are live.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, we got a little delay and the music just popped up on my screen. We are in the beautiful home of Doug and Anna Balfour. And right here to my right, with our matching orchids,
The beautiful Doug
the
Balfour.
beautiful Doug Balfour.
You're right. They're left.
Hey, and there's Garrett over here. And off to our left, off camera, is Anna Balfour herself, better known as our scripture reader on Sunday. This is Anna's husband. Anna is the usual star. But Doug has gotten very insensitive about his screen time, and here he is tonight. No, I'm just kidding about that. Their son Ryan is here as well, down from Richmond, and they're going to have all their kids in this coming week. They have 3 children, and we look forward to this. Doug?
We have.
And Doug has become
think.
a great friend of mine, and as you can tell, he's from Alabama with the use of his accent here.
Birmingham. Birmingham, Alabama.
Perfect. That was perfect.
Bingham.
That was perfect. But he was kind enough to sit in with us tonight and also to open up his home and Wi-Fi because you seem to be safer from lightning strikes here.
So far. Let's not push it.
Yeah, I won't. But thanks for being here tonight. So let's just start at the beginning and tell us who Doug Balfour is.
I've been trying to figure that out for about 62 years. So, kind of like ideas on a postcard too. I'm a North London boy who had a somewhat difficult childhood. Came out of a sort of like a single mum but middle class type home, and then kind of like escaped into Africa and lots of other places.
But in a little bit of a teaser here, you ended up doing a lot of development work, a lot of charity work around the world. You visited 150 countries?
107 to date.
107 countries you've been in in your career. But you didn't start in Africa as this philanthropist, this world-changing idealist. You had a different job when you went to Africa.
Yeah, I
right?
did, and I had a different dream too. So basically, as a teenager, I read all these, Alistair MacLean and Desmond Bagley thrillers and James Bond, and I thought if I went to Africa as a geologist, which is what I went to university and studied, I would kind of like, get the sports car and the girl and be rich and that was the kind of like dream I went to Africa with.
Well, you're not rich, but you do have a sports car and
a girl.
And a girl.
Yeah.
So
and
3
actually
children.
worked out okay.
So you're in Africa. You're a geologist by trade, by study.
Yeah, I worked for De Beers, which was basically into diamond exploration in the Kalahari Desert.
What changed your perspective that you would say, I can't do this anymore, and this whole idea of service and service within the Christian community, Christian missions groups? What was the big change that because you could have stayed, you'd be an executive with De Beers today.
Yeah. Probably 2 or 3 things sort of all coming together. So, I had a passion for justice before I ever went to Africa, and I think that was something to do with my reaction against what I saw was a lot of injustice that I kind of like grew up with. I had a sort of I had a passion for overseas and international, and we'd done quite a lot of traveling as a family. So I get to Africa, and what I see really bothers me. So we're talking about a lot of race issues at the moment. So I went to work in Southwest Africa, which was just next to South Africa when South Africa was in apartheid. And so basically I'm now negotiating all the racial tensions and issues of apartheid and bringing black field assistants onto my geology exploration program.
And just for clarification, apartheid, it was this
Segregation
system of segregation
of black and white.
and it was different even than the race relations we've had in North America because it was a white minority that was imposing white supremacy on the black majority and the black, quote, owners of the land, the citizens of the land, because the whites there were from Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a long time ago. And typically it was the Afrikaner white population that was in power and was creating this legal segregation. So that really started to sort of touch this deep sort of feeling of injustice, and I did what I could. And then ironically, came across another, the result of genocide of the Bushmen and the remnant of the Bushmen in Kalahari, and their situation. And they basically were in really dire straits. So they were, drunks, and they were getting TB, and they put them, the authorities have put them into little concrete villages, and they're essentially a Stone Age hunter-gatherer group.
And you're still a geologist at this point.
Yeah, this is like my sort of, part-time, what can I do about the situation, whilst I was actually running a 90-person exploration camp 3 hours from, outside town at 21, 22.
So you're 21, 22 years old. You're free from the big city after a pretty tough childhood. I mean, I know that. Doug's got a great book, and the name of the book, I don't have my copy with me tonight because I gave it to Garrett and he didn't bring it.
Doing
I
Good,
forgot
Great.
to bring it.
Doing Good, Great, and you can get a copy from Doug. So you escape London and really some hard times with family, and you make it after sort of being the father figure of the family, and you're this young kid in Africa. They give
Who
you
didn't know what
they
you
give
didn't
you
know.
They give you a machete or a shotgun and said you're in charge,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, they gave me a shotgun and basically said, you're in charge, and basically your boss will be on shortwave radio at 9 o'clock every morning. Good luck. So it was kind of like make it up as you went along, and there was two really interesting incidents. So one was when we were having a braai in South African terms, which is barbecue, and these Afrikaners were turning around, and I was arguing about, kind of like inclusive race relations, etc., and they didn't see it that way. So they turned around and made one of the best compliments I think I ever got, which was, "You are a waste of a white skin," which was their perspective of me.
Good compliment. Then.
Yeah. And the other one was when the Southwest African equivalent of their Secret Service came knocking and basically said if I was going to make too much noise about the Bushmen and we were starting to raise their issues, etc., then I was going to be out of the country so fast that I wouldn't know what hit me. So you know that you're doing something right when you start to get blowback.
Have you always been a troublemaker?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good trouble?
Good trouble.
That's the way
I
you
wouldn't
see it?
I wouldn't put myself in the sort of John Lewis camp, but
It's
good trouble.
So you left Africa and came home?
Yeah, 2.5 years there. Came home, just found diamonds in Western Australia. So I was going to get a master's degree in business administration, get an MBA, and basically go out to Australia. And I got derailed because I met this girl called Anna, and basically we were in the same sort of town, and we connected, and I realized that I'm going to have to put all my international sort of travel on hold because she'd got another couple of years on psychology to actually finish off.
So
we got married.
And she took you on sort of as a case study, right?
Yeah.
Psychology.
Yeah.
And
Anna, she's putting her thumbs up at the moment. Anna turns around and introduces me usually as her life case. I actually don't think that's great publicity because I'm not doing that well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And from there you make complete shift career-wise, or did you slide into this career change?
I slid in. So basically, I knew I was grounded. So I thought, okay. So I had a friend working at stockbrokers. I thought I could be a mining analyst. I apply for the job, go to the interview. They tell me, no, we don't have one of those available. We decided that, but we got a retail analyst job. Do you want to do that? And I said, yeah, okay. So I'm working at the stock exchange. And then Anna gets her first, qualified job. We go up to the Midlands. I slide, trying to find a job. I slide into management consultancy, and then find one of my real passions, which is organizational development, design, change management, how to make organizations effective at whatever it is they're trying to do. And I do that for 5-6 years.
Okay, so are you 30 yet?
It's exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah, but are you
Yes.
30 yet?
I'm 28, 29. We've got our first daughter on the way, Lexi. And we're going to Christian festivals and talking about doing more, So, our frustration is...
As a volunteer,
potentially as a volunteer, as a missionary, looking at, various mission organizations, most of which all wrote to us and told us there is no way we want the two of you, because we said we want to use our skills, etc. So we came across somebody who said, yeah, we see missions as it starts as an adventure. You can travel, you can make, do good, and you can actually use your skills and expertise. So we kind of disappeared off to Amsterdam and became missionaries, and basically turned out into sort of the Christian kind of overseas mission world. And we were 30 then.
And so you're 30, and you take your first assignment as a missionary where?
So you have to do some training. So we did 3 months theology training in Amsterdam, and then we went to Bogota, and we worked with street kids on the streets of Bogota.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which was cool in the 80s, because there was a lot going on, most of which was a bit scary.
Huge cocaine cartels.
Yeah,
in the 80s.
and armed policemen on every intersection and all that type of stuff.
And Lexi is born?
So Lexi's born, and we take Lexi with us. So she is sort of 1 and had her first birthday out there, I think. And then we go back to Amsterdam. Anna works with a number of the sort of working with some of the mission community, because it's the international headquarters, but also works with some of the addicts and the prostitute kids. And then I'm kind of doing a little bit of stuff with sort of drug addicts, but also actually managing, a lot of the base's normal operations, personnel, logistics, all that type of stuff.
All the management piece.
Yeah.
And you end up back in Africa for a number of years.
Yeah,
so I know you.
So we did that for a couple of years, and then basically back to Liberia. Somebody says, "Look, will you come and run?" The civil war in Liberia was horrific. It was a mini Rwanda type situation. Horrific. Basically, just coming to what they thought was a sort of ceasefire situation, where there was Monrovia as a city in a sea of Taylor-held guerrilla area type thing. And so we were asked if we would lead a team for an outfit called MedAir, which is a Christian relief agency. We go in, we realize that there's a whole mental health component that's really needed. And so basically, we send Anna in as part of the needs assessment from Sierra Leone, and we set up a PTSD for young kids program in Monrovia, but we also run a clinics program for 50,000 people that haven't seen an aspirin for 2 years in the greater sort of Taylor area.
And do you have a young family during this time? Kids are being born?
4 and a 2-year-old. So we had Jonathan by then. So we got 2 kids at that point.
All right. And then Ryan, who's here with us tonight,
Yeah.
off camera, is he born, quote, on the mission field or back in?
No, we came
in
back
Great
to
Britain?
came back to the UK, and basically sent Lexi to school. Ryan was born then, and then basically I actually went back to doing some organizational sort of consultancy type stuff until we were trying to figure out what God had for us next.
And so you worked based out of the UK, but you're still traveling, being engaged in the developing world.
Really doing more kind of like, well, that's when I was working in with the oil industry, and I worked secular work, working for whatever consultancy work was necessary. I was kind of like director level, so I got some really good. I couldn't understand what God was doing. I really wanted to be still in the Christian relief and development world, and I got this phenomenal opportunity of commercial director for a management consultancy, and I took it. And what now I realize is I needed all that experience for what God then had for me, a little bit later.
Yeah, one of my questions is, I've read most of your book. I got to all the
Congratulations.
principles. I got to all the principles, but I remember being just completely fascinated with your story and your journey. And so my question kind of, pertains to when you're going through these experiences and this journey, and your family's brought along. How is your faith being shaped, and then how does that experience and that journey shape ultimately where you end up, long term?
So, trust. I mean, what happened was that I feel like, God gave us some small things to have to trust on, and those small things became bigger things. Mm-hmm. And then eventually we got to the decision about, are we going to take a 4 and a 2-year-old and basically go to a live war zone? And, we had pretty much all of our parents against. Most people thought we were crazy. So we're sitting in Switzerland, and we got to make the decision that day. So it really had gone to the wire. And Anna basically was, as she usually is a little bit behind with all of her, quiet time readings, and gets this passage which is talking about, pestilence, famine, and war type thing. And
It was a prediction of 2020.
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And I go out walking at the same time, and I'm praying, and basically God puts this, just a verse in this, that I don't know what this verse is. I can't remember what it was. Ezekiel, blah, blah, blah. And I come back and I open it up, and there's 3 chapters later, there's this verse that is absolutely repeated, because it says, and as God said to Ezekiel, blah, 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 pestilence, war, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, okay, God, all right, we get it. We got to go. And yeah, and, we didn't have money for all that mission stuff. So basically friends supported us. A few churches supported us. You develop faith muscles in the same way, we develop all of our disciplines.
And you eventually ended up back working out of the UK for a mission Christian organization. Is that right?
Yeah. So I did like 2 or 3 years.
And was this before or after you were detained in Africa and thought they were going to kill you?
Oh, no. That was Liberia. So in Liberia, kind of like, I used to have to take the payroll to all the clinics, which was a 13-hour drive away, and in Taylor's area. And I mean, the checkpoints, there was 34 checkpoints there and 34 checkpoints back. And the checkpoints are manned by like 15 and 16-year-olds high on cocaine, and goodness only knows what. And it was always the girls that were worse. They were really, really scary, So we rock up at this checkpoint, and they detain me, and it all gets hairy. And usually these things, I've been, this has happened multiple times, but normally they kind of like, it's a bit of a game. They kind of scare you, they kind of like hold you, and then they let you go. But this time, I was carrying all the money for the wages, and basically they decided they were going to steal all this. And so then we realized as it got into nighttime, me and this Christian Liberian guy, that this is going to get really potentially ugly. This is different. And I couldn't honestly see a way in which we were going to come out of that alive, because it just didn't make any sense. They had to sort of kill us to stop the audit trail of what happened with the money. So, and this is my one little kind of like, I think this is hilarious, because we found ourselves sitting as the dark came down, singing Christian choruses, trying to keep our spirits up.
What was your favorite
And
song you sang? I want to know.
And saying like, this is just like Paul and Silas in prison. Oh dear. But I mean, amazingly, they basically took us out into the night. I had to drive. We went through you don't drive through checkpoints at night, because basically people shoot first and ask questions later. We went through all these checkpoints. They ended up at NSA headquarters, Taylor's headquarters, and they shoved me into a cell. And eventually the next day, late next day, the UN came round and basically
Fished you out.
Fished me out, and kind of like I was still there, and they were relieved. And
Wow.
And Anna was very relieved, because they'd knocked on her door the day before and said, "No, you mustn't panic, and don't talk to Switzerland, and don't talk to the media." But essentially, Doug's disappeared, and a week ago, 2 nuns disappeared, and we found them in the boot or trunk of a car with, kind of like bullets through their heads. So it was like, actually, it was a lot worse for her as she sat waiting than it was for me.
Absolutely. And your children are very young.
Yeah, so we didn't tell them what was going on.
Of course. Did Ryan know to this moment? How
No,
over there
he's
listening?
totally
He's
shocked.
finding out
He
for
is
the first
spellbound
time.
as he reads his texts on his phone.
We need a camera on them. Just
Yeah.
So you go back to the UK. You're working with people like Steve Chalk, Oxfam. Is that? Did you do
we
some
did
partnership with them.
We did all sorts of work with actually all the big relief and development agencies. So I ran something called Tier Fund, which was the Evangelical Alliance Relief Fund. And it was the biggest evangelical charity in the UK. And so basically I'm kind of like working with the Catholics for Catholic relief and all that type of stuff. So the Catholics and the other religious organizations, but also with Oxfam and Save the Children Fund. And we set up, for emergencies, we set up 13 organizations that didn't compete on advertising, which I think is fabulous. And we pooled all the money together, went out to the general public. So, I mean, it was amazing. I got to meet, all sorts of people, from Muhammad Ali to kind of like royalty to, I think the most surreal moment was I sat in the cabinet room at number 10, opposite Tony Blair, and we were discussing what he was going to raise when he went down to Johannesburg for this summit on international development and water and all that type of stuff. So there was some amazing moments in 10 years of running this organization.
And so 10 years, what made you renounce the Queen and come to America?
Well, the real story is my kids. And actually Ryan, who's still standing out there, turns round and says, we had a very, very long garden, and but it was very narrow. It was like 14 foot wide. And my kids are saying, Dad, we need a bigger trampoline. But we need a 14-foot trampoline, because we can't do our, whatever it is, gymnastics on anything less. So I said, well, that's not going to be possible. And they said, well, we're going to have to move. And then being my kids say, so what country are we going to go to?
Because they've lived all over the world.
Yeah. And so it was like, oh, well, I kept going places. They kept saying, have you got a job yet? And then finally somebody took me to lunch and said, come to America. There's these 2 billionaires giving out a lot of money. We need somebody to actually manage all the programs. Please come with your family to Philadelphia. And that's what we did.
And that was Geneva Global,
I was Geneva Global.
the company that you first worked for and then ultimately owned yourself as a consultant.
Yep. 2 years later, I did a management buyout, and I bought the company. And then last October, I sold the company, and
I'm out.
And I am out.
And moved to the beach full time.
Yeah, and moved to the beach full time. And here we are. So we've had 2 years now.
Fantastic.
Being down here.
And your sense of timing is such that you did the management buyout as Lehman Brothers was collapsing during the 2007-8 collapse, 7-8-9 collapse of the U.S. economy. So you broke
after.
the U.S. economy.
Well, I wouldn't, not single-handedly. I think others definitely had a role to play. But my timing was possibly a bit off then, because I did buy it the day after Lehman's went down in 2008. But also, wasn't it smart getting rid of a company just before COVID hit?
Oh, absolutely.
So, I've improved.
You
what
have
do
improved.
you know?
That's right.
Not much.
He's a prophet.
He is. Well, Garrett, earlier today we were having coffee talking about our chat tonight.
Yeah, we were.
And he's
co-conspirators.
got a great question about faith and your observations, having lived in so many places. So, Garrett, I'll pitch it to you.
Right. Yeah. So, knowing a little bit of your backstory and through reading that and getting to know you, and through your journey and your experiences, you're now living in the U.S. in 2020, and so you've had this incredible opportunity to see the global church, God working in different communities, villages, cities throughout the world. But primarily, you spent most of your life in the UK. So the question I have is, what are you seeing now in regard to faith and Christianity and this whole Jesus movement thing that's happening in the U.S. that might compare or contrast to some of your experiences of living in the U.K. and traveling and being in these different places? Because the U.K. is known for being post-Christendom. So faith, religion, this whole Jesus thing has a different flavor. So what do you see happening now in the U.S. that, maybe 30, 40 years ago you might have been seeing in the U.K.? Can you elaborate on that, share a little bit of your take?
Yeah.
And then we have a few questions from viewers.
Oh,
So,
great. I think. So, massive question. Let me start with the UK. One of the differences that you have to get your head round in the church in the UK versus the church in the US is that the church in the UK is really a unitary church, right? There really is only one center of the UK, and it's London. If you look at America, then there's just so many different pools of different centers, both geographically and culturally. So it's like like the UK is like one state of America.
Right.
And therefore the church actually is a lot more unified. So the evangelicals that I worked with, it wasn't considered to be weird to actually have summer festivals of 30, 40,000 people, and Baptists and Methodists and Anglicans and Pentecostals and all the rest, they all would go to it and be part of a single event. And, you can't imagine that quite happening over here. So denominationalism was not such an important issue. We'd gone almost post-denominational. The other thing that's, and you referred to it in the question, the other thing that's true is so few people now go to church. 30, 40 years ago, basically in the UK, just like here, it was in some parts of America, it's still the thing to go to church.
Yeah.
And it's not about your necessarily radical passion for Jesus. It's about, well, that's what you do because you live here, right?
Yeah.
And that's expected. That's what the UK was like. But we're past all that. If you go to church now, there is a certain amount of ridicule. There's a certain amount of sort of soft. I think persecution's too hard, but it's made uncomfortable. The general population views Christians and church with suspicion. And, you know, my kids suffered being bullied and picked on in school because of that. So you don't go to church unless you really mean it. So there's a winnowing out of, is this really important to you because you're going to pay some sort of cost for it? And that's a big part of church in Europe generally.
Yeah.
And that's why it's more about small pockets. And maybe that's why we can afford a little bit more unity, because there's only a few of us. You know, it's not like we got mega churches around every corner like you do in Texas.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, the flavor of Christianity in Africa and Asia is completely different.
Whoa, yeah. I mean, Africa, it's like, I mean, I often used to sort of say Africa's like, you have one Christian in Africa, you have a church, you have two Christians in Africa, you got a denomination, you got three Christians in Africa, you got two denominations and a split.
Yeah.
You know, and there is an element where it's a very young, immature church. And there's lots of brilliant churches that are full of sacrificial, loving, happy, incredibly faithful people. But then there's some really weird and wonderful stuff out there that have got names, you know, like this long and, you know, very, very strange. So
much more Pentecostal?
Yeah, much more, generally much more, because it fits the African psyche so much more. They can't stay, you know, you play music and you can't stay in your chair. You've got to get up.
So, and this is true, I think, whether it's London or Atlanta, Georgia, or South Africa, culture shapes the church as much as church shapes the culture, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think every culture has a task to find its own unique personality in Christ. And what the interesting thing is, I think it's like the facets go back to a diamond. It's like all the facets of a diamond. You know, we never understand and capture the whole of the facets of the Trinity. We only capture a few and we focus on those because those are the ones we understand. But other cultures find other facets to worship and enjoy and participate in. So there's so much that you can learn about your own blind spots and widen your experience of God by going into sort of multicultural worship situations.
Someone asked if you miss the travel and the engagement with the world.
Yeah, I mean, I do miss the, you know, being sort of grounded as we are all at the moment. I do miss the international travel, not from the perspective of another flight and all the rest, but from the interest perspective of something new. I like new. I enjoy the jolt to the system that it actually gives me, as I have to absorb new ideas and and reconcile them with what I already know. But on the other hand, in 2019, I did 97 flights, most of which were all domestic US.
Wow.
And I was so done with flying. And it's like, so that was probably COVID. It was probably my fault as well. Because I said, I don't want to fly
you took it everywhere.
ever again. And it's like,
Well, from your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, there you go.
And another person asked about maybe a specific time that, and because certainly you've had some dark times in this journey, where you really felt that God gave you some light. That's a good question.
It is a good question. God gave me light. I feel like God gave me light so many times. My observation is that the spectacular times when God answered, questions of guidance or delivery or prayer or whatever, came in my earlier days with God. And it's like God has to shout, but once you actually start tuning in, it's like, hopefully we start to listen to the sort of the silent voice, the whisper, and I don't need to be shouted at so much. So the spectacular, examples of God answering prayer and such like were in our first half of our sort of Christian walk. And now hopefully it's more a question of I'm more tuned in, so I need less beating around the head to get it.
That's really a great answer, even as it relates to the scriptures. And as you think about the trajectory of Christianity as a whole, we open up the Bible and like, oh man, all these miracles, and God spoke to people, and there was a lot of beating over the head, and we just don't see that the way we used to. Well, maybe there was so much shouting that it's there.
Yeah.
Paul even talks about in the New Testament that these things were written down, to educate you essentially, and so that you would not repeat some of those mistakes. And it's for your own edification to look back at the earlier stories.
And I'd like you to start to become mature and not need the milk, but I really want you to actually work with the real meat.
I mean, you would think Ryan is in his mid-20s.
Yeah.
You don't need God. You don't need to speak to him like he's 6 anymore. I hope. Maybe once in a blue moon.
Once in a blue moon. No,
but the point being
absolutely
that
no.
is
your relationship with your adult children is a completely different relationship than you have with your children.
And I like that bridge, because you and I and Anna together have had some pretty incredible discussions about faith, about our changing perspectives on faith. Can you talk a little bit about not just how you heard God when you were younger, but I had this faith at 30, and I have this faith at 60.
Doug, you're 60?
2.
Ed,
Phenomenal.
and why is that the case?
He just thinks I was 70.
Yeah,
No,
that's right. He's giving you credit.
Yeah. And distracted me. So, never mind. As long as it didn't get your iPad. So basically,
It's waterproof.
Early on, I had a. So the way that I understand my life, and we've all got some sort of construct about how we look back at our lives. So the way I understand my life is that I had this sort of passion for justice, which actually just got me to the point of all the outer stuff that we'd just been talking about. And then I also had a passion for trying to find some inner wholeness, because I was a very wounded, messed up, I was the hot mess, angry young man, hot mess, kind of like, and that's where sort of God met me. And the whole of this sort of time since 17, when I became a Christian, has been about trying to work out the passion God gave me for justice and working out and doing something for the kingdom, but at the same time trying to not be as much of a mess as I started off, and start dealing with the wounds and ask God for healing, psychological healing, spiritual healing, to actually become more whole as a person. And as I went through that time, I started off with, the more typical black and white faith, which is, and I needed this is right, this is wrong. You do this, you don't do that. This is what God thinks, and we know what God thinks, so that's fine. And then as I sort of went through my 30s and 40s, first of all, my outside experience, but also my healing allowed me to start to relax, to realize, oh, God is actually far more complicated and mysterious and bigger than I ever thought. And so I started to sort of live in a much bigger world of grays and questions, and to the point where, only recently, like a couple of years ago, I got to a point where I thought, okay, let's just focus down on Jesus, because Jesus I get. Jesus I can get my kind of like my head round in terms of, wanting to be with Jesus, wanting to do what Jesus, be the role model of what Jesus said, and what would Jesus do in the situation I find myself. And that then became the talisman for, my last couple of years, really. And so, yeah. So basically, does that answer the question? I think I kind of like
it's a good
lost it a little bit.
It's a good answer, but I've got a couple follow-ups.
It's a good answer.
But yeah, it leads into, I think it perfectly leads into the story that we've gathered, that you actually said to your daughter at one point that you were like that you were like God, or that you were even God. What do you mean? What is that all about?
Thank you, Anna, for that little recollection.
I've heard this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, so basically, Lexi and I were having a massive argument. I think she was about 15. And I was kind of like, I was turning around and trying to actually instill in her this sense that you can change the world. And I fervently, passionately believe that we can change the world. And so basically, she turns around and says, typical to, no, you can't change the world, can't change anything. And so I'm saying, yes, you can. And then she says, eventually the voices get louder and we get more angry.
Of course.
And we start losing it. And she turns around to me and says, no, you're not God. And I said, yes, I am. And then I realized what I'd said. And we all fell about laughing.
And what is Lexi doing now?
Well, she's changing the world.
She's changing the world.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
She's,
In New York.
you have remarkable children. You do,
yeah.
you do, which is a testimony to you and Anna, both. A question here, and then I'm going to follow up my other one. Great question. After hearing so much of your story, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
Wow.
These are great questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think, as life goes on, you start to realize that the most important thing, and this sounds a little cliche, so I apologize, but the most important thing are your family and the relationships that you have with the friends, the people that are closest to you, and they're the ones that essentially, at the end of your life, you're going to be hopefully still interacting, with. So I realize that with every social activist, there's this danger of caring about the world, but losing sense of caring about the people next to you and close to you. So I really want to, I took a decision about 4 years ago that I am focusing on my friends, my family, my relationships, rather than just social action, the world, etc. Not that I don't care, but that's really important. So honestly, I just think I'd like to be that legacy of being a great dad, a loving husband, and someone who was passionate about God and passionate about justice.
Great answer.
Ronnie, you said you have a follow-up question?
Well, mine's actually a serious question. So
Mine is too.
you're giving me the wink over there, so I don't know what you're up to.
Garrett looks like he's enjoying himself.
I know he
too
is
much.
enjoying it. He loves this.
Well, my
Go ahead.
question kind of pertains to, I did ask Anna yesterday. I was like, Anna, what's a good question I need to ask? How can I get into the heart and soul of who Doug is so that people have an understanding of who this man is that we're talking to? So part of my question is just really, what's next? What's on the horizon? You've had this long, incredible journey, faith-filled. What do you feel like God has on the table for you next? What keeps you up and awake at night?
What comes next is a question that God, as far as I can tell in the still small voice, is saying, you wait and see. And, technically I've got another couple of months left to do the consultancy of the company that I've just sold. I've got to do a couple of other things and tidy things up by the end of September. And my sense is God has turned around and said, when you're finished doing the things that you've got on your plate now, then it will become apparent what you've got to do in the future. So that's not to say that so we talk often about waiting, and guidance and waiting. And I've always believed that waiting is active. So I'm pushing out all sorts of things that, it could be this. So I'll get in touch and I'll meet them and I'll talk to them. And I just applied for a job that I probably don't want this last week, but who knows what it might lead to. So I'm trying to be actively waiting, but our sense is that Anna and I are going to do something together, that it's going to be like a team. I think it's probably going to be something much more local, rooted where we are. And I would love to be at that stage of helping somebody else succeed, working with others so that there's generativity, so that they are, lifted up and are successful and run their own organizations. And if I can help that, through Renew, through other ways, I just would love to do that.
Right.
Good answer. Now I'm going to ask you, as your faith has changed, and this is as much a personal question, so I'm projecting just to see what your experience has been. Are there friends you have had and have that find your changes of faith unnerving?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, again, there's a difference between essentially some of our American friends than our UK friends. Our UK friends generally are more in tune with a more liberal, a little bit more kind of like relaxed perspective in terms of faith.
A bigger picture of faith.
Picture of faith, more international picture of faith. But I mean, definitely, Anna wrote this Christmas letter out and was was kind of, as she often is, very honest about kind of like where we were and the things that we were reading and thinking about. And there was definitely a number of people that didn't, took us off their Christmas card list, literally. And
Wow.
A couple that sort of wrote to us and said, well, I don't think you should be reading this stuff. I think this is bad for you. I think that, you're sort of going off the edge here. You're gonna be backsliding, etc., etc. And it was right. I was, watching the backsliders. But yeah, we definitely moved out of a number of groups, not our close friends, who it's been interesting. They've been on a similar journey, but a lot of fringe people that didn't understand why we would change.
How do you negotiate those relationships now?
Well, some of them
Tell me, Doug.
Well, I mean, moving is really good, right? So we had a whole load in Pennsylvania and we moved. Changing jobs, each of those things, we actually did kind of like leave people behind, and they left us behind. And there was like a tacit, well, we're not going to try and stay together in this journey. But we work very hard. Anna and I, one of the things that we really believe in is working really, really hard at the friendships and the relationships that are core. And so we put tons of energy into that. So we've put lots of energy into the core that seem like we're really on the same page. And we just let others kind of like go, not with any bad will or whatever. We just haven't pursued it as much. And our perspective is that most people aren't very proactive. So basically, they're typically reactive. We're usually the proactive ones. And if you don't pursue them, you just fall off the radar.
Yeah. What is it?
You've got to.
I've got the same experiences, and I'm just comparing notes here.
Does that ring true for you?
It does ring true for me. There are scores of people that I have been close to in the past, and they've written to me or called me, and the things I say or write about now makes them uncomfortable. And that I've either lost my way or sometimes even the accusation that I've lost my passion for something. Or, I don't emphasize what I used to emphasize, or you're different than you used to be. And I'm not talking about in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm talking about,
the last couple of decades.
Yeah, over the decades.
Yeah.
And it's...
Or even that you're not Christian anymore. I mean,
true.
I've had that, and not sure that you really, believe what I believe anymore.
Right.
And
I have really struggled, honestly. I've struggled with, and I know the answer, but I've really struggled with what generates the need in someone to devalue our friendship based on the fact that the direction of my life or the steps I take, the faith that I now hold to. I mean, when you write a column for 15 years called Keeping the Faith, I feel I'm still keeping the faith, but I can tell you the faith I'm keeping now is different than the faith I started with.
I mean,
and so it does disturb me that I have to say, was our friendship based only on the fact that we were once in agreement?
So, first of all, you're a media personality and have a media persona and are much, much more out there and therefore much more vulnerable to that type of experience of getting the feedback. And I'm not, I'm not now. And so that's a very big difference. But my understanding is that people that are coming from that perspective, you are making them uncomfortable because they thought that you agreed with their really closely held and the reason that they have security in their faith was that they'd got it all ticked and tied. They got it all. They knew what they believed. They knew exactly. And then you're this guy that we did see eye to eye and we shared all that. And now you're saying this. So you're basically a threat to my psyche. You're a threat to my sense of who I am. And so, when insecure people feel that, what they do is they lash out, because lashing out and making you other is a whole load easier than turning around and saying, well, maybe I'll sit down and rethink and look at myself deeply and wonder whether or not I've got all this right. They don't want to do that, so they're left with the only other alternative, which is I am going to have to disown my relationship with you because you're too much of a threat. But I knew you were a good guy, but you can't be a good guy now because you're saying all this trash talk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it's taken me...
But it's really sad.
It is sad, and it's taken me,
There's a massive amount of grief in that.
There's a lot of grief in that.
Yeah, because they're relationships that are dying, and...
Well, and for me, so many of these relationships are relationships within the circle of the origin of my faith.
Yeah.
Which is, painful.
Yeah. And yet you still owe them so much.
Well, and for years I was like, oh, those damn fundamentalists, I can't believe the things they inflicted on me. And now I realize that guess what? I'm not the person I am without that.
Yeah.
So I got to get my arms around
And
that.
I wouldn't have had this faith if it hadn't been for them reaching out and bringing me this way. But the trouble is, I've moved from where they were.
Right. But I can't reject it outright because it's a part of who I am and my experience. Would you have gone to Africa if you had that hardworking, loving dad who came home every day and said, "You want to go pitch the ball, son?" No, probably not.
No, I might have done something very different.
Right. Right.
And I wouldn't have been in touch with that sort of passion for justice if I felt like I hadn't felt this injustice. And I don't think I would have, my brokenness as a person and being the angry young man, and being messed up inside and needing therapy and being the life case of my wife, had all that not been in my life, I doubt I necessarily would have pushed so hard on so many things and felt like, we'll take the risks that we'll take. But God always means it for good, in exactly the way he said it to Joseph. He kind of like works it out in our lives and redeems. I love that image, God redeeming, not responsible for, but redeeming the bad things that happen to us by bringing good things out of it.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it's not saying, oh, those things were necessary evils,
No.
which is a really a
And it's
a
not
very insensitive thing.
And it's
to
not
say.
fatalism either.
No, it's
they
just
didn't
saying-
necessarily have to happen, but because they happened, God will still use them for good, later on in your life.
And you find out too as you get older that the people that often end up hurting you in your relationships, they were just doing the best they could with with whatever skills they had.
Yeah.
And something Richard Rohr says, shouldn't be reading him. Something Richard Rohr says.
Richard who?
Yeah, exactly. He says 90% of our pain and suffering comes through relationships. The overwhelming majority. So it should be no surprise that the majority of our healing will come through relationships.
Yeah. I always remember him explaining one thing of how on the cross Jesus did the very thing that humans don't normally do. If we get pain, we pass it on, even if it's kicking the cat. And yet Jesus stood there, hung there on the cross, and basically took all that pain of the world in, but held it, didn't pass it on, and transformed it into something amazing.
See, that's one of the key changes that have taken place in my own theology, since you're pouring salt into the wound here, of why some folks think I've lost this insight of, because...
So you better not hang out with me anymore.
No, I'm going to hang out with you on this one because this is a good way to wrap it up. Our time is coming to an end. My view is that same one, in that Jesus takes all the hate, the animosity, the worst that the world can dish out. He takes it. And he takes it into himself and it dies with him. Rather than God saying to the world, look how awful y'all are that look what I had to do.
Yeah. And you're responsible.
And you're
for that.
responsible for
this is your guilt.
Rather, it is Jesus willingly inviting it in because he knows that the only way to conquer all that's wrong is life-giving sacrificial love. It's the only thing that works.
Yeah. So I think for me now, the big kind of like daily, weekly challenge is to take all my little annoyances, my little emotional disturbances, the things that don't work, the things that don't work out how I think they ought to work out. Take those little pieces of pain, and instead of passing them on as we tend to, and me taking it out on Anna and getting cross or whatever, but actually somehow transforming that and not passing it on. And I think that's, that fundamentally, if we all manage to do that at the global scale, the international scale, the national scale, kind of like race, COVID, everything else, the family scale, would create that change world that we were talking about.
Hurt people, but healed people heal people.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for all the healing that's taken place over your decades.
And so am I.
And
super grateful.
Thank you for being our guest tonight. And Anna, over there, thanks for opening your home. Ryan's got great beer choices, by the way, just so everyone knows. Garrett, thanks so much for helping bringing all the gear here and doing this. We'll be here,
we didn't get hit by lightning.
We didn't. Wait a minute, we're almost done.
Oh.
We'll be back live on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, God willing, in the upper room. And then next week, another Q&A. Thanks for joining us tonight. Y'all have a great week. We'll see you Sunday.
Was a time of the preacher when a story begun. Choice of a woman Well, she left him for